We are delighted to be joined by Conor O'Shea. Thank you very much for coming on for the love of rugby.
Indeed. The RFU website says that you're in charge of the strategic direction of professional rugby in England. So the first question that people know is, what is the strategic direction of professional rugby in England?
That is a great question. That is a great question. Winning, isn't it? When it comes to the shop window, it's winning. Dan, it's funny. It's great sitting here when you think about what does that mean? What does it look like at the top end, which is your end? It's all about winning because that's what people see. It's the shop window. But then behind it, and you think back to 16, 17, 18 years ago, probably when I met you guys for the first time, is what is the talent coming through, that it's not just about winning today, it's about how can you be continuously successful and making sure that we've got the right structure in place so players fulfill their potential, because that's all you want. You want players to be the best they can be, and England has an abundance of talent.
It does. What do you feel like you're judged on though, Conor? You obviously mentioned there about winning, but does that fill into your bracket, or does that fill into the coach's bracket?
It's everybody's, because I think in any job you're in, you're emotionally invested in it. You want teams to win. You feel low when teams lose, and that I'm not just talking the men's senior team. You're talking the Red Roses. You're talking about pathway teams. You're looking at clubs. You want the clubs to be successful because you just feel you're part of an ecosystem that you want to see successful. But ultimately, and I was thinking when I was coming up here, and I said it to you before, Dan, like you look at some of the young props that are coming through, and we'll touch on it later. And when people like Afo, people are talking about him a lot. Billy Sella, who came off the bench against Leicester, 19-year-old tight head. I'll be 70 when they're your age. That's pretty frightening. You'll be in your mid-50s. But I want to be sitting down watching those when they're in there. We want a structure in place that allows players to have long careers and great careers. So if we're sitting down, you want to win today. But if you're sitting down 5, 10, 15 years from now and you're watching players that you've even had a small input into seeing them being world number one players, that's satisfaction for me.
How far off do you feel like you are from that structure of allowing that to happen?
Well, until you win at the top end, you're never there, and that's what you'll ultimately judge. You go back, and I'll track back your kind of cohort's history, and it's not finished yet. But for Dan, still going, is that you got to a World Cup final, you got to that Pollard kick in the last second away from another one. Not quite win, but it was an exceptional group of players. So you're never guaranteed success at the top level, but I do believe that the current group of players, and you can track back from your teammates like Freddie or Ollie and those, George Martin, but track back from that age down, I think it's a pretty generational team, not just average. There's an unbelievable team if we get the right systems in place for them to achieve their ability. And I'm not writing off some of the older guard at all, never ageist, it can't be. You look at the Springbok pack and you see what they've achieved, and you look at their age profile. That's why you think you have to have a structure that keeps them in the game for a long time. So until you win, you're never there. Do I think this professional game partnership won't get people bored, things like that, as opposed to the agreement, is going to be part of that solution? Yes, I do. Will it be perfect? No, it never is. Sport is emotional, it's subjective, it's our passion, so you get really irritated. I'm sure Tigers fans get irritated at times when they win, lose. Same with England fans, but we've got a system that if we bring this group of players through properly, I don't know whether I'm there, whoever's there, it'll be an unbelievable England team.
So how would you balance, because there's some established players, we talk about you Freddie Stewarts, you George Martins, they're already probably established in the England team, and obviously in say 5, 3, 4, well even the next World Cup and the year after that, 7 years, there's going to be people in the squad who aren't there now and obviously hoping younger and coming through. How do you balance from your role? I once had a coach basically tell me when I was like 19, it's like, Coley, we could play you every week or we could win games. So it's that balance of like developing young players and experience them. But how do you, from your point of view, how are you, because clubs, obviously where most players are going to play their rugby, are going to want to win games, and you can't, if you're going to win games, sometimes you put out your best team, and your best team might not involve the young guys, put it that way. So how do you, from your point of view, what's your interaction with the clubs in regards to, we have this player here, we want him to play? Can you put pressure on clubs, or is it more of the sort of?
You can't put pressure because you have to select to win. We've all lived it. I mean, you have to select to win. It is so important that, and we might touch upon it at some stage, you talk about the championship and its role in your development at Bedford, and you think back to that time when people like Castro were there at Tigers, and you were breaking through and in past them, and it's the same for everyone. So having a strong and vibrant, not just championship, but national leagues, universities, where players can get game time. One of the things, and you know Tofty really well, a year ahead of Mark Mapletoft, I don't do it. One of the things that he did last year was get a year ahead of this new professional game partnership. So he started working with the clubs, with the under-20s coaching team, to really drive game time and make sure our young players, because listen, for the best will of the world, if you do not play as a 9 on a regular basis, you ain't ever going to fulfill your potential. It is one of the toughest decision-making and execution positions on the park. If you go 2, 3, 4 years without playing really top level, same for a tight head, if you don't get beaten up in a scrum, I'm sure, looking back at the game at the other week when, you know, Afo is against Ellis and there's a bit of a face-off, Afo will get his head put somewhere in times to come because he's a young tight head. He'll learn, but he shows enough that if you were regular with him, if you give him the exposure, and that then comes back to your question, Cody, how can you guarantee it? You can't. How through this individual development plans that are being rolled out across the clubs for the 20s, for the seniors, how we really drive that game time, I think is part of that solution of players fulfilling their potential, and that's what we're looking to do.
Was that one of the reasons, Conor, to bring back, obviously the England A is now back, whose idea was that to install that, and I'm assuming it kind of marries up with what you kind of just said.
Yeah, and again, but you get people to start talking about it. International rugby is different, and players can be brilliant club players and not great internationals. They can be average club players and unbelievable internationals because they're able to adapt to different systems, different coaches, being away from home, not being. Ben, look at you. If you're with a different 10 or if you're different 8, can you just go straight in there and hack it, or do you need like 5-10 games? And you don't get that at international level. So every time it's twofold. It's getting players into that environment where they're not just with their mates that they play week in, week out, see how they react, but also keeping little groups together. And you guys grew up with an unbelievable bunch of players, became really good mates through tours, through good times, through bad times, and keeping connection on a more regular basis. And back in the day, I don't know, did you go on a Saxons or a Churchill Cup? I don't know, you're probably too high flying for those things, but
no, I did it. You did a Saxons, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to the Churchill Cup, yeah.
You did.
But it's good fun. It's away. It's not pressurised, but you're still away. You're doing something different, and you get to see how people are. So I just like this idea of a thread of groups, little pockets of players from different clubs who come together, and they're just good mates, but they keep that connection. They don't just go from under 20, and the next time you see them is 6 years later playing for England. It just doesn't feel right.
Conor, I would like to know, who holds you accountable within your role?
Chief exec.
Do you report straight to the chief exec?
Yeah. The board, probably more importantly myself. If anything, you always do something. I'll probably go back to my time with Italy and sitting down the very. This sounds really good. It sounds like a nice job. This first thing I did was I flew to Paris and I sat down with Sergio Parisse, and I said to him, "I need you for the next couple of years." I said, we ain't going to win much, but we're going to build something that we can look back in 10, 15 years' time and we can be proud of. So our job is to give the youth a future. That's all we ever played for. I said, I can't magic up something. We can't magic up something from nothing. We'll get fitter, we'll get better, we'll get stronger, but we'll make sure that there's some young players coming through. But I need you to be part of that. So as long as you're comfortable that it's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be, and I remember a journalist come to me at one stage in a press conference going, great stat this, Sergio Parisse is the first international rugby player to lose 100 times for his country. And he said, is that an embarrassment? And I said, well, no, you're the embarrassment. Because for me, that's a mark of the man. He could easily have quit. He could easily just said, I'll take the money in France, Japan. I won't bother with my country. But he came back every time, and you know really well, with the same will to win, gutted after a match, coming in on the Monday, preparing as if he's going to beat the All Blacks every time. And that's why he did what he did. And in a way, that's that accountability I like. I want to be able to say that whatever everyone in the current roles that they have within English rugby, they have a responsibility to the players, and they have a responsibility to create an environment that allows them to fulfill their potential. Keep on coming back to that, because I look at the players and it's always the same. If England ever get it right, England will be unstoppable. And I genuinely believe they can be that.
He's an incredible player, Sergio Parisse.
How much of that with the Italy system? Because obviously there are two sort of fully professional sides in Italy, and now obviously Italy reaping the rewards of, like, they've got a very good young crop of players coming through, and we've seen them in the Six Nations. And how much of that system, say from Italy, can you apply to or to England, for instance, with the balance because obviously with England you have now 10 professional teams. The teams sometimes I think are sort of run not. There's always been a bit of not a misalignment between England rugby and the clubs, isn't there? Because the clubs want to win, and the clubs are like, we pay the players, they're our players. England are like, well, we play for the play. And there's that sort of, whereas like you look at different systems around the world, like Ireland and stuff, and probably more because they're more franchisey, more aligned in that regard. So with Italy, I guess they are franchises of so they're not sort of, so how would you balance would you take learnings from, say, Italy, and can you apply over here and vice versa?
I don't know. I think what you do, Dan, is you say, create an English solution to an English challenge. It's an English model. We're not going to be Ireland. We're not going to be New Zealand. We're not going to be Australia. It has to be for England, and England is incredibly special in its own characteristics of what it's got, and there's always going to be that, when I say club v country, that the clubs, the investors in the clubs, and I spent 6 years at Quins, I was a long time at London Irish, and gutted what's happened for there, nearly 10 years at London Irish, but there's a lot of people who put blood, sweat and their own money into the English system, so it's always going to have an element of conflict, but the more that we work together on things to come to a solution. That's why it's pathetic, isn't it? You're probably looking at me going, oh my God, this is an old fella talking. The difference between one word is not a semantic. The last was an agreement, and this is a partnership. Does that mean it's going to be perfect? No, it ain't going to be perfect. Anyone thinks that is delusional. But is it a step forward? You're all the time trying to say, can we work together to make everyone better? You want to see winning clubs. You want to see winning England. And if you don't have that ambition, get out.
Just want to come back on the Parisse chat. Conor, you obviously had him who was driving it, understood your vision. How did you then handle the young players that weren't getting those results? And was that something that you had to do consciously, or was it something that he did as well?
No, I think it's been realistic, and it's not, we prepared. You're very lucky. You get some great days. We did. And I thought international rugby was easy when that fourth game in, we beat South Africa in Florence. I thought, oh, this is easy. It isn't. But it's having a realistic ambition. If I went into anyone and said, we're going to win the World Cup, well, it's going to be looked at like you're delusional. So we always said, we'll prepare to win every game. We'll become better as rugby players. But our job, our vision, so to speak, is to create a future for the youth. That is what we're doing. So every time we go out, that's your responsibility, but we're going to have to win. So you have to come up with some weird and inventive things, like not contesting rucks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
To try and do something different in the short term. But even then, I know we won't go into that. We had got a pumping in the previous Six Nations game, and I was going in, how do you go to a group of players and say, fellas, we're now going to go away from home to Twickenham. We're going to do exactly the same thing as we've done in every single game, including the one we've just got thrashed in, and we're going to get a different result. If you stand in front of people, they're just going to go, well, we're not, are we? Like, they're just going, you'll lose faith, so you have to come up with some things that are a bit different. So I think realistic in what you're doing, saying that England should aim to be the best club system and the best country system in the world. is not unrealistic. If that's a realistic vision. For Italy, it's a different vision at the time. I think if you're there now, you say, can they become more like Argentina with the group of players they have and win big games on a more regular basis? I think they can, because the age profile of the team they have is strong, and it's getting stronger. So they're going to be a tough team to play for a lot of years now. Doesn't mean they'll win Grand Slams, but they'll win and get some scalps.
Last Italy question, because obviously we're here to talk about England majority, but is there a sense of pride when you look at them now? Because they have come on leaps and bounds, and I'm sure some of the structures that you put in place, you're now seeing that. Because you look at Italy in the Six Nations prior and the one, the last couple of years, like, they are very, very competitive. They win games, they push teams all the way. Do you look at that and think, I'm actually happy with how I left that?
You'd look and say, I'd like to think I played a small part in that regeneration. And I was, weirdly, even though working with England, I was gutted with the Italian performance in the World Cup. Did not see where it came from after the Six Nations leading into it, and then even in their World Cup warm-up. So I watched pretty closely, because you have a lot of affection to something you gave and your family gave a lot of time to. So the World Cup was just kind of, I was going, what the hell has happened? But then following Six Nations, they bounced back to show actually the previous Six Nations hadn't been a blip. And as I say, I think there's a lot of good young players that they have that will get stronger over the next few years.
Conor, do you reckon you can be a very good international player, but not necessarily a good club player?
Well, I think you can. But people are... You have to have a natural talent. People are maybe a bit, self-deprecating in saying you have to be a good player. But I think there's something different that marks out internationals, and that can be anything from, it's not easy, is it? Going out in front of 60, 70, 80,000 people, embarrassing yourself at times, and not going into a hole. And that's part of it, isn't it? Like, Dan probably's never gone backwards in a scrum, but I'm sure maybe he did once in his life. You've probably Hames of a pass, terrible box kick, intercept pass, had a little show and go when you shouldn't have, get slammed by people in the media, get slammed by people in the crowd, but you go, I'll come back, I'll do it again. And that takes a certain resilience. So I don't think it's always necessarily the best players that are able to hack it at the top. I think there are players who just got that mental resilience, and ability to go through those tough times. And I'll give you a story I never understood. My first cap for Ireland, and it's always stuck in my head. The captain at the time congratulated me and said, I'll actually congratulate you when you get dropped and come back. I was going, what? This is my first cap for my country. This is the weirdest thing you've ever been said. I did not understand them until it happened. And it was almost within that international group, it's okay now, this is the easy bit. I want to see you when the times are tough again. Can you actually make yourself come back? And it's easy when you're on the way up, but you will get a knockback. Can you come back from that? And that's what marks the international, the top ones apart, which you two, by 100 times, how many times do you guys get dropped?
Still a good few. Yeah.
A lot. Easy to chuck the towel in. I think we had little pockets in Ireland at the time. We had the famous five, the Magnificent Seven, all these groups.
You told me this one, yeah. You told me this one.
So it's different international sport.
Talk about resilience there. When it comes to, say, the new role and new crop of bringing young players through, does that resilience factor into your way of thinking in regards to, because if you just fast track a player straight to the top, potentially, who hasn't gone through the ups and downs of being picked, being dropped, and with the media nowadays as well, it's quite easy to hype a player up and sort of go, he should be in the squad, and everyone goes, and they get fast tracked through, and then that player has actually got the tools, probably mentally, to go, I've never been dropped before, because it's literally, it takes off. Is that factor into your thinking and the coach's thinking of the players and the crop of the 20s? And because it's quite hard to, you don't want to put adversity in people, you don't want to create fake adversity, if you know what I mean, by going, just drop him and then, he's going to play the next week. So how does that factor into your thinking when it comes to the future of the game and building these players?
When is the right time? But then it's knowing the players. So we talked at the start, when did I, when did I meet you guys for the first time? When did I meet Marla for the first time? I remember meeting him in Bisham Abbey with the London under-18 team when he was like 16, 17. And the consistency within a pathway, people look at it, of coaches that we have to know players. So when they get to this, so different people have different family backgrounds and journeys that will maybe give some natural resilience to them anyway, and they can be fast-tracked a little bit quicker. Some, as you say, shouldn't be put in there, shouldn't be kind of the anointed ones that just go straight through. So I think the more you get to know the young players, and not that I'll be Steve or coaching at that level, just being able to say, well, this player that's coming through is A, B, C, and D, and he kind of needs a bit of careful management, because the first time a senior coach gets to, I remember Tony Dipros coming into me at Harlequins going, we have got the replacement for Nick Evans. He is unbelievable. And I went, oh, brilliant. Who's it? It's Marcus Smith. Oh, brilliant. He's 13. I went, okay. I might be here
hold that thought for a few years.
For that one, could be. But the academy staff, they know the players, and so giving that little balance when they're coming the whole way through the England pathways of things you've learnt about them on tour, what they're like, is hugely important. So yeah, you can fast track some, and they're young and they're through quickly. Others might take a little bit of time.
Conor, what's your relationship like with obviously Steve Borthwick and John Mitchell, and Mark Mobetoft that you've known for a long time under 20s, but more Steve Borthwick and John Mitchell, and do they report to you? How does that dialogue work?
Listen, I'd probably talk to Steve now. I won't say as regularly as my wife, but it's pretty regular at the moment. And Mitch all the time. So they report. Steve reports into Bill. That's the direct line. But in terms of, I learned once I was in Olympic sport just for a couple of years, and one of the things I went in, and it was in the, at the time, the English Institute of Sport, and it's now the UK Sports Institute, and it was sports science and medicine, not my skill set at all, but I was kind of managing the whole thing at the time. And you learn a lot about technical and non-technical leads. So from a technical point of view, myself and Steve will have the conversations around rugby. That's just natural. But you don't, from a non-technical point of view, from the organisation and the kind of the whole of the English ecosystem, that's not a problem having someone like Bill. He knows his rugby, I'm not saying he doesn't, but it's that non-technical lead, and that's as important as well. So yeah, the conversations are regular with Mitch. It's been really interesting seeing him going into that Red Roses role. I think one of the reasons we went down the route with him was we've got a great coaching team behind Deeks, who you know well, Lewis, and Nathan Catt is working across both pathways, looking after the scrum. You've Lou Meadows, Sarah Hunter. It's a really, really good team. But for Mitch, the pressure on that group over the next year, whatever 330 days or whatever it is to go to the first match, is going to be big. They're the world number one. The only match they've lost in 6 years is the World Cup final. He knows what it's like as the pressure's ramped up, as the media begin to try and not pick holes, that's wrong, but they'll be scrutinising everything about it and looking for the edge, and that might, for players who have never experienced that home World Cup, I haven't, but for players who haven't, he'll be able to guide that coaching management team, because he's been there in so many different capacities, and he'll be able to take the pressure.
It's true, because they try and distract you, don't they? In your favourites, and they want you to know their favourites, and they try and distract you. You can easily fall into that trap. Actually, having someone like John Mitchell, of course, his experience, you forget, he was New Zealand coach in 2003, and they lost in a semi-final against Australia. So he's got vast experience of all different situations. So that's going to be huge going forward for the Red Roses.
Yeah, I want to see Mitch take the heat. Not take the heat, but you know what I mean? Like, he is a way that sometimes he's a great guy, and it's like his personality, but say if that, it's how he'll manage that sort of interest in the team, and whether we've seen some coaches say not make it about themselves, but you know what I mean, take the pressure off the team by being that front centre person. And if Mitch did that, it'd be quite interesting, put it that way.
would be good.
I won't delve into that. but like on any playing journey, you have coaching journeys as well. And you probably don't. Mitch actually coached me for Ireland, and he was a player coach at Garryowen at the time. Was brought in as a kind of a breakdown specialist, and the Mitch of '97 coaching was interesting. And I've had those conversations with some of the penalties that we had to suffer when we didn't quite do it right.
We did hear when he joined England for the first time, John Mitchell. We'd heard various things about his maybe how he used to coach in the past. It was a hard taskman, but actually when he's a completely different bloke now. But he's fantastic. So,
but you have to
evolve, don't you?
You have to, but also, I mean, like when you get into coaching, if you ever get into coaching, how you deal with players will change. You think you're current, your currency goes very quickly, and you have to think of a different way of. I'm seeing Minty later on today. Minty brings me one of my greatest memories. I was in a meeting. He probably doesn't even know this. I was in a meeting at Queen's years ago, and you're probably going to say he did. I saw Minty on his phone at the back of the room, and I thought, like, it's pretty unacceptable. I thought, he's elder statesman. I'll take him aside after the meeting. So I just asked the room then to any feedback, and he goes to me, I've just taken some notes, and he'd been writing some notes on his phone to say back to the meeting. And I thought, thank God I didn't have a go at him but for me, that's not something I'd even consider, having a phone. But now, how people communicate, how you do meetings, how everything changes, and that's why coaches have to change. If you try to be a coach of the 1980s now, you're dead.
That's Nick Easter. He's a
even like I said, that phone thing. Even now, like you see blokes on the phone, like it's almost because of that. I mean, we're from a different generation, but it's like, God, I think I'm like texting somebody or something like that. So it's like I have a book instead to actually show you're involved. But like everyone does it on the phone.
Minty probably was. He probably knew he had been caught. No, these are notes. You know him. But anyway.
Conor, we want to know about the enhanced contracts and how they work and how you got to this stage.
We talked earlier, didn't we, about an English solution to an English challenge, and coaches overegg themselves a lot of times. I think the nature of any great coach is they've got their best players fitting on the pitch. That's ultimately it. And you still have to have competition, but I think if you were sitting around, if we did a little straw poll, and I don't know who Steve will finalise in his enhanced group, but I reckon you'd write down a few core people that you'd want to see. And rather than, and a phrase again, because you've worked with Steve both for England and for Leicester, you don't want to live in hope. So it's taking more ownership of trying to ensure within the English system our best players are fit and available for England. That doesn't mean they're picked. You have to earn the right. So whether you're an enhanced EPS, in the EPS, or you're outside, Steve's job is to pick the best team for England, full stop. That's his job, and he needs to do that. But I think when you look back on any international team, you'll see this group of players that you know, and you've seen it throughout your career, that when they're there together, I always looked at the All Blacks, and I got them, you think of Retallick and Barrett and these guys, and they were in the second row, always there, always fit, somehow always there for selection, because they're just managed in a different way. And that's what we want to, that's the principle of it. The principle is to say there's a core group, we'll look with the clubs to manage them in a better way, looking at not selection but medical and conditioning for international rugby, that will make sure or ensure as many of our core players are on the pitch. That's all it is. It's pretty straightforward, the thinking behind it. It's not a central contract. It's a contract that allows us have more say into the that program for those best players. But so important. If you're not the best player in England, you ain't picked. You have to be the best. And just because you're on one of these doesn't mean you're in.
So does that make, we talk about sort of medical and conditioning side of things, is that more of a England, say, final say in regards to medical treatment, or is it England have a larger say, not the final say, but a large say in how people are managed, and say if someone has an injury in the treatment course and that kind of, because obviously we've previously, 10 years ago, like there used to be loggerheads, like with the weird Leicester, like sometimes the coaches were banned from coming in, the medics were banned from coming in because Leicester knew best and England knew this. And
we had an angry little man.
And the players got stuck in the middle ultimately, didn't you? And it was kind of like...
You talking about yourself?
I was talking about as someone that you'd known well, actually, Connor.
Yeah. Danny?
Yeah.
But the the players would get stuck in the middle, and obviously you can't upset your club and you don't let your country down, but the players stuck in the middle. So is that I guess the whole point of the purpose is you don't ever get to that point anyway. So there's better communication between club and country. But is there in England have a final? You know what I mean? Do England have a greater say? Or
well, it would be final say in terms of some of those medical interventions. But going to what you said there, that's exactly the way you want to work. Will there be? If you sat down with anyone, I think generally what you don't want is, and go away from medical conditioning, is someone going off doing some top-ups on the side behind everyone's backs. Not that would, and that in the past has been something to get international ready and all this sort of stuff, because club rugby is different. It's a marathon. We all know that. You start in September and you're finishing in May, and you want to peak in May. But international rugby is like the ultimate sprint. There is a lift in intensity. So working to say, acknowledge that, and that the players are doing small little things, but we want that to be, where it can be, 99% collaborative. I reckon when it comes to it, there'll be one or two cases. The media might want to make one or two cases a very big deal, and saying there's loggerheads between club and country. But I reckon when we look back on it, there won't be many. That medics wouldn't be aligned if you sit down in a room together. Conditioners wouldn't be aligned. One conditioner might want to do a 20-metre sprint, another might want to do a 30-metre sprint, or do X dumbbell versus, the way they are. They're all very into their own little ways. That'll always be the case, but the ultimate principle from us is, yes, to have more say, more input, more control. We'd love it to be collaborative, but this is not this silver bullet that everyone's going to be a happy family. It's sport. It is tough, but the more we can communicate, the better that'll be.
What's negotiations been like, Connor?
Because just for the listeners, I guess there's three parts to this conversation there. There's the union, there's the clubs, and then there's also the players. And we don't know at the minute, no enhanced contracts. No enhanced contracts have been signed. So the negotiations, I guess, between the union and the clubs is complete, and that's been signed off.
Yeah.
And then there's the final part of the players agreeing to that is what is probably not the hold up, but that bit hasn't been finalised yet. But in terms of your negotiation with the clubs and the union, how was that? And
it takes a long time, and it mightn't seem at the end the actual talk on rugby was pretty straightforward, because we were very clear right from word go what we felt that we needed to move England on, and some tough stuff has happened, hadn't it, over the last couple of years in so many ways. Like you look at Worcester Irish, and Irish from me, where I spent 10 years, met my wife through that club, to see what happened really was heartbreaking. It's not a fully deconflicted calendar, but 10 clubs has concentrated players. It's deconflicted the international club window, but then it comes to players can't play in every single game, can they? So you still have to manage that. But a lot of the conflict between club and country because of those crossovers is gone. And that was by accident rather than design, but it did happen, which allowed probably the negotiations to move a little bit smoother than there's always then when it comes to it, money, lawyers, etc. Luckily, I don't have to get involved in that. I just have to focus on the rugby. So there's that bit done, and obviously to make sure that we get the best deal in place that we can for the players as well. So we'll finish that off in the next few weeks.
From a club point of view, I guess, to sort of clear it up, because obviously some people listening will be thinking enhanced contracts. One team will have potentially 10 players on enhanced contracts, another team will get 0, and how do you balance that out? But it's not the players we playing for those clubs regardless of enhanced contracts. You know what I mean? Like the RFU doesn't have the ability to go, oh, you've got 2 English 9s at this club, we're going to move one to another club, and like you sometimes see in Ireland and stuff. And I think because we've had several questions, haven't we, from listeners regarding player movement and stuff, and also was it going to make one team really strong? But the money that players get on enhanced contracts will come from the money they would get from England appearances rather than directly paying somebody's salary through a club. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, correct.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just trying to make it for the listeners to understand that the enhanced contract, one team could have 10 enhanced contracts, but it's not going to make them more competitive because they're not going to get an extra £2 million to spend on their salary cap. That money is nothing to do with the cap. It goes into the players' pockets.
Yeah,
instead of international match fees, you know what I mean?
Yes, from the player wage point of view, there's always been the incentivisation to have English players, and that is more pronounced in this agreement in terms of how the money is distributed. But there is base funding. I wouldn't get into the intricate details of that. And there's always disparity. You look in France, Toulouse have more French players and they're more funding, and that's not private funding. That is funding through the agreements they have. So that is always the case with the top teams. They generally have more of those top players, but you're right in the way it's structured, is incentivized to bring those players through. Same as with the 20s. So we're incentivizing within that 50-man under 20 EPS squad because they're the ones that we want to start pushing through. And the biggest driver in that group is playing time.
Would you have liked the contracts to have been done like years ago? You know, what's made it get to this stage now, and why do you not think it's not been done earlier?
I think I did say I think the lack of there's still Prem Cup games in that, so there will be club games going on. I'm not saying that, but the lack of Premiership European, there is absolute acknowledgement. You know, players can't play in all the games, and the limits have gone down now from 35 to 30 for this year, as a guidance. We might come back to that at some stage, but I think there was more will, and there's also England and the international game drives the revenues of the game. Full stop. 85% of the money that England Rugby make is through the men's national team. Now that will grow. We'll see the women's grow through this year in terms of how that can drive more revenue into our game and interest, because this is a real generational opportunity with the Red Roses this year over the next 12 months. But you have to recognise the international game drives revenues, so it has to be successful. And it's the one thing that struck me when having never been involved in international, like the senior international, yes, as a player, but just going back to Italy, when I sat down for one of the first or second times, and I had a brilliant time at London Irish and at Quins, and it was like 16 years of my life in those two places. But it's very much your parish. When you come to international sport, you feel this unbelievable responsibility, because suddenly it's not just about the local shop or your next door neighbour or something like that, or someone within your county. This is the country, and it's not just rugby people. It's people outside of that who tune in to see how the national team is going. So that's the responsibility for international sport. It's not just about the game, it's about your country. It's just so different.
Just with the strategy, Conor, and all those bits, do you look at other sports industries, other places that do it? I know you mentioned you want the best product for England, and I absolutely agree, it has to be the best for England. But have you looked at, let's say, in other football clubs, NFL, baseball, basketball, whatever it may be? Have you looked at other strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always looking, and most of the best ideas are not new in sport, but they're kind of moulded. So when you talk about enhanced EPS contracts, you'd call them the central contracts. They're a variation of a theme, aren't they? And everyone is all the time voraciously going out and looking at other systems and other places. But you still have to, it's like any coach, you become, every system, every sport, you'd like to think it's unique. As a coach, you learn from people that you're exposed to, so you kind of become them in some ways. And you look back in your coaching journey and you see the people, and it's the same when you're looking at sporting systems, and you're looking and everyone, isn't it funny, you always see people going out and they immediately go, they're into, so the Instagram, and they're in Man City and they're doing this and they're doing that. Everyone goes out and about looking and learning. If you're to cut it all back, if you keep the player at the centre and you make the players the best they can be, I think that's when you're there. The system around them needs to be there to support them, but make your players as good as they can be, make them happy, and I think you're halfway there.
Where is the negotiations with the players at present, without getting into too much detail? Because obviously there's been no contracts announced. Are they still in the pipeline
Yeah, I
negotiation
think
of what?
no, pretty good. I think you probably know more than me. No, I think pretty good. There's a few things we need to work through, but I think 99% of the way there. But it's important because it's the next 4 years, so you don't want to kind of anyone going into it with any feeling of disappointment. You want this to be absolutely nailed on. Everyone as happy as they can be. No one will ever be 100% happy, but we're in a pretty good place, and it's been very much direct involvement with. I won't name the players in case they get into trouble, but very direct involvement with the players as well, which is good.
Is there any temptation? So the under-20s have just won the World Cup this year, absolutely brilliant. And we look at World Cup final in 2017. Actually, that team includes Zach Mercer, Gabriel Imbatoye, James Grayson, Pablo Doggio, but obviously he played for Italy. Grayson's in Japan. Toy played in France. Zach obviously went to France, came back. How do you make sure that these guys from that group that's just come through, Conor, don't do the same as maybe that group did?
The landscape has changed in terms of squad sizes now, and that does make a difference in terms of. And I think there's a more of appreciation if you're given. It takes probably some of the failures that have happened, but if you give some of these young players an opportunity, their ceiling is so much higher. But you have to go through a bit of pain. We talked about Affo, and I've texted George Skivington after the game, kind of when he played against Ellis, to go kind of stick with it, because he's going to have some tough times. If you're not a tight head prop age 20 who hasn't some tough times, I'd like to. Well, maybe Coley can name me one, but I can't remember many that don't have. But regularity and the ceiling that these guys, you don't want to put pressure on them because they have to. It'll take time. The same with some of those other players. So I think there's a more of an understanding and appreciation of the young players. What would kill me, and it has killed me over the last number of years, is when I look and see these players not get an opportunity, and you go 2 or 3 years. And you'll never quite, if you don't get enough game exposure at a young age. Top end, I think the problem is playing too much. But not the bottom end, but this end is getting enough game. That's why it's so important we have the right structure beneath the Premiership, with the Championship or like hopefully a reimagined Tier 2, and also in the National Leagues where some people earn their corn, because not everyone is ready to go into the Championship. Some 18, 19-year-olds, and Leicester, great relationship, but not in them. And you see the way some players can go there and come up, but then there's Leicester Lions, and some of the players go there. So for me, it's getting these players game time, but also just trust them, because they might be painful for 1 or 2 games, but the level that they can reach. I think what I love about going to things like the 20s World Cup is you see them against the best of the other countries. And when you see the England front row this year absolutely destroy everyone in front of them, you go, okay, they didn't just do it in one game, they did it in every game. And everyone knew it was coming. No one knew what to do. Then you kind of go, okay, that's a different group. It's not just a normal group, because they haven't just lucked out against a crappy scrum. They've done it against everybody. And you go, okay, so how, as a group, and I think all the clubs can see that as well, but it's not just about the front row, who's behind them in the second row. And if what kind of buzzes me, and this is when I get away from the politics and I just start talking rugby, I love it. And I think of that team that played in the World Cup final. You think of Billy Sella, who's under 20 again, Sadeki, Junior Kapuko, Tom Burrow, Henry Pollock, Kane James, Archie McParland down at Northampton, Ben Redshaw, Angus Hull, Jack Bracken, all of them back in again for this year. And you go, wow, I can't wait to see that team. I'm not putting any pressure on Tofty. I cannot wait to see that team play, because I also know some of the other guys that are coming in. So you marry all these guys together, then you think of, George and Ollie and Freddie and Tommy Freeman and all those geriatrics.
Yeah.
That's what should excite people about English rugby. How quickly it all marries together. Like, you think on the wings and Slights and Manny and It really is. I know you're coming towards the end. Cody probably has another World Cup in him, but
At least another 3.
you should have at least. You can keep going. But it's exciting. It really is exciting, but it's the style of rugby they can play as well. So there'll be political ups and downs. There'll be losses. There'll be pain. But it's what comes out the other end that'll be worth it.
I'm like obviously sitting, knowing the players that I know at Leicester, seeing the guys under 20s. Like the talent is there. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I do have a question though, Conor. Is there a temptation? You know, the under 20s we're talking about game time and giving them, and we're going to do the enhanced contracts for the crop for a group of players. Is there any temptation to actually pick your 5 best of 20s, and the RFU almost has them on a central contract, but then a bit like they do the Ireland system, just for that age group, and then you move them. So, for instance, you got a tight head, let's say at Leicester for argument's sake. You got Coley there, you got Joe Hayes there, you got Will Hurd, like really good tight heads, but you've got a really good young prop. But if he's centrally contracted as an under 20, under 21-year-old, you can go, actually, let's say for argument's sake, Saracens need a tight head. We're going to relocate him. Do you think that could ever happen?
No.
Shame.
That's a one-word answer. This is when you learn, can we be more open to conversations like that? I would love to think we could. And it's a brilliant point. And to get you into a room, to talk like that with a group, as opposed to when you're a coach, you are a director of rugby, you say a lot of the same things. How many dressing rooms have you been in? You must sometimes roll your eyes and go, oh my God, how many times have I heard this speech? Like you've done it. But then if you got Wayne Smith in and he said exactly the same thing as you've been saying for 5, everyone in the room would be transfixed. Oh my God, it's incredible. You say, well, he said the same thing as I have. So what you said there, I think is a brilliant point. I don't think the English culture or system will ever be able to do that. So This is the English solution. But having the individual at heart, if you're in a club and you see an opportunity for somebody to go elsewhere for, even if it's a year's loan, that they'll get game time, they'll get 15 games, having that ability to talk from one club to another like that, as opposed to England doing it, how good would that be? Because I do think there'd be cases, I'm sure at the moment, as Steve Diamond kind of remolds Newcastle, that there'd be 2 or 3 players who could go up there and maybe play for a year and then come back down and get 20 Premiership games, and they may be tough, but they'll come back battle hardened and ready to rock and be a first choice player. So I think that's a utopian ideal in the future, but maybe you can start exploring that one.
Well, I'm happy to bang the drum, because I just think we're missing a beat with that, and I think there's opportunities in certain players in certain positions to go on loan, to go and play, and of course they go to Championship, but in the Prem, and do that. And if we're needed, to come back, but like get them out there, and if that can be collaborated, which it seems unlikely to happen, but I think that would be an ideal situation.
These discussions are ongoing the whole time in how could that work. So I'm not saying it's never so, but it's something that you look at and say, wouldn't that be brilliant? There is the bit of being in your club crest. Go back to Dan's time. If he had spent 2 years or a year, at the time, being 4th choice and not playing, rather than a year of playing at Bedford, would you be the Dan Cole now? Probably not.
Well, I was going to, because there is a question around when I played in National 1, I don't think it was in the Championship back then, but which was 18, 19, 17 years ago. But the level from the Premiership, I would say the Premiership's, like the level of Premiership is, the gap between that and the Championship is probably bigger than when I played, because I remember going to Bedford and we had 5 or 6 European Cup winners from Northampton, like blokes that were sort of coming to end their careers, we'd play a Northampton team that then when it got promoted to the Premier, obviously got relegated the year before, but the standard was, there wasn't a massive drop-off, or there was a big drop-off, but it wasn't. I think today it was almost the Championship, I don't want to be disrespectful, but it isn't as strong as potentially when I played 20 years ago. And for my development, it was massive, because you could go to the Championship, get beaten up, play against, I remember blokes that had played internationals you'd play against, and get better, or blokes that played in the Premiership were on the sort of way down, and it's that balance. So you got exposure. But obviously Leicester, like if I got screwed, I got screwed. Fine, Leicester didn't bother them, they didn't lose the game. And it's that ability for players in this pathway, because it's also a role of, for instance, what's your view on, not foreign, I don't mean horrible foreign players in the Premiership, but if you have a Pollard comes in, you have a world-class player, he obviously adds to the environment, makes people better around him. But then he's also taking up potentially a spot for an English player that could develop. What's the, not solution, but do you have a view on, I know there's supposed to be so many English players, but then you go search well for EQP South Africans, don't we, and that kind of stuff. But and props, you've got to be a certain size to be a prop. That's why a lot of teams have big people are in short supply, so you go elsewhere, and sometimes they can stop. I remember 12, was it the centre or something? There was 2 English players starting in the Premiership at one point, and centre, so that's going to put a block on how many players you can play. What's the solution there from your point of view? Because obviously, as I said before, you can roll out under 20s, but does that actually, if you put out the England under 20 side into the Premiership now, I don't think without being disrespectful, I don't think they'd win a game. You know what I mean? So if they became like the 11th team and played, I don't think they'd win a game. And then, therefore, you're not maximising them. So how do you drip feed them into teams, players, but without actually going, Leicester, you can't have Pollard, you can't have Jasper Wiese, or actually make everyone else better, and you have to get on their standard. Like George Martin will learn so much off Wiese, and, yourself, Joe Peel will learn off you, but off Pollard and people around them. How do you, it's without strengthening the South African game as well?
Well, there's loads in that.
There's a lot of questions.
Well,
there's a lot of questions in that.
I'm trying to unpack my thoughts in one go.
I'm getting old. I'll try and get through that. I'll try and get
Take your
through
time.
that.
But the ideal world is, sorry to shorten it, the ideal world is the 20s play every week, don't they? But then do you potentially then, how do you counter against that actually potentially weakening a league that has international players that make everyone better? And then is there a middle tier of players that you maybe sort of have to encourage clubs to go actually back the 20-year-old rather than the 28-year-old?
Well, where to start on that? Well, first, I think there are a couple of clubs in the Championship, and there's probably a divide within that currently, and that's why we're looking at trying to reimagine what that league looks like over the next 12 months. And that's been probably really difficult conversations. But you look at the Coventrys and the Ealings of where they are, and they're very, very competitive. I think.
Well, so Ealing ran us almost beat us in the Premiership Cup.
In the Premiership Cup, so I think there's that level there. But we want kind of all boats to rise to give that experience. There's a few clubs that are acting, probably a lot of dual register players and known players within that league. And you're right, young players are a risk, and putting them all in at once, you can't do. The very best, they come through. Others, and you look at, I was looking at the Quins game the other week, and Cassius Cleves and Nathan Jibaloo, who were a year out of that 20s, didn't play very much last year. In their first year out, we're down at London Scottish a bit and breaking through, so it takes a little bit of time, but they're still only 21, not exactly geriatric. So it does take time for them to come through. I can say this as an Irish person, because even though I've lived in England, barred my time in Italy since 1995, the cultural balance that some of those foreign players bring is good for the league. And it's good for English players. So we have within the regulations now the English qualified player quota system in there, but also we've relaxed the rules around the foreign. So we want the best players. So it doesn't have to be necessarily what you're talking about is the journeyman, and we're trying to recreate. Sport is cyclical in a weird way. So there was an article done in 2016-17, I can't remember exactly, and it was, when will the French top 14 catch England? Because at that time it was all about the Premiership, and it was the couple of European Cups in a row, and England were winning Grand Slam in Eddie's first year, and the Premiership was bubbling. And for a raft of different reasons, we've gone through a really tough time, and COVID did not help, whichever way, but it will come back, and that's what we're trying to recreate. And there was a time when Pro D2 was nothing. So can we get 2 tiers in England? Yeah, we can, of course we can. It'll take a heck of a lot of work to get there, but you have to have a North Star to say we could create that, and that will give the system where more of those young players can be in those leagues and coming up. And it's seen almost as that You don't want to, it's not a development, an incubator, and not a, I'm sure there was a time, and this is 17, 18 years ago, when you went to Bedford, that there were some people that did go to Bedford alongside you going, oh, I don't want to go there, I want to stay at Leicester. Why would you want to stay before choice? I want to play every week.
Yeah.
But keeping your attachment to a club is huge. Like Leicester will want people to care about their badge. So there's, through all the loan agreements, through all the things you talk about, there's this balance, because ultimately everyone wants to play in the Prem and everyone wants to play for England. That's the goal. But making people more comfortable that actually, no, my time when I'm down, I remember, it's going back to someone like Joe again. We sent Joe, when he was a kid, this was, out to Esher.
Esher, yeah.
And where he was due to play for Esher National League, and we found out he was in the second team. And we kind of rang Mike Schmidt, Mike Schmidt, who was director of rugby at the time, and we're going, well, he's gone to play for you. He's not gone to play in the second team. And Mike said, oh, he turned up late for training. And we were fine. And it was almost, it's the lesson. So there was a reason behind it. So you get grounded to actually go down a couple of levels and see how lucky you are to be a professional rugby player, because the sacrifices people make to play the game are huge, aren't they? And I straddle amateur professional. You probably grew up in an era where there were still people who had done that. But there's an era that have only known one thing. So I think it's quite nice to keep them maybe grounded by letting them see what it's really like.
Well, one that I always remember, Leicester, we used to pile on a car, 4 of us, and go to Bedford, but we'd sort of finish training at Leicester and go to Bedford, and then there'd be blokes coming from work to Bedford to train in the evening, go, and you were kind of like, and they did it Tuesday, Thursdays or Saturdays, you know, and washing your own kit and like bringing your own like supplements and food.
Do you not do that anymore?
Never have at Leicester, mate.
No, we've always been lucky at Leicester. We never had.
Yeah.
Shocking.
But you did. But that's what I'm saying. But in regards to that, humbling's the wrong word. But it just, you understand how fortunate you are to be at a Premiership club that, you know, gets paid. You get paid on time. You clothes get washed. Everything's catered for you. And I think it's very easy for a young person coming through. You see it in our academy, like everything's catered for you. Especially, it's no fault of the coaching and support staff. They're trying to make the best environment for the players, and like the academies run as like a mini first team, but at the same time some first teamers have earned that right to be there because of what they've done and where they've been, whereas the academies, and it's that grounding press, and they go away and it's like, oh my god, you have to wash your own kit, I don't know how to, what, I've got no life skills, you know what I mean? But again, it's that ability of, but it keeps you realise how privileged you are to play for a Premiership club, and you therefore can focus purely on the rugby, and you can not enjoy it more, but you give more to it because you know the sacrifice we made for you to be able to do that.
You appreciate it, and you have to, just having that element of appreciation of what you've been given is huge.
Conor, do you think every England team should play the same, from obviously the first team, senior team, under 20s, under 18s? Do you think there has to be an England style, or do you believe it's more about expansive and going out there and learning more at 20s and 18s?
I'll take a phrase from John Pendlebury and Tofty, and they talk about exploring boundaries, adapting to win. Yes, every team wants to win, but I think if we create a model where you're only able to play one way, then if there's a change of coach, if there's a change in weather, if there's a change, if you're not able to adapt. So I think there's a time where if I put you outside and ask you to run down the corridor, you probably want to win. Every single sports person wants to win, whether they're playing cards, tiddlywinks, rugby. So you're not saying to anybody, whether they're 16, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, that you're not going out to win this match. But we want to ensure that at times, especially in the under-18 programme, that they're doing things in different ways. So they're challenging themselves. Whether you go to the 18s going to South Africa this year at over the summer, were the 18s that were a year young, because you're getting them ready for next year. So you're not going there with the 18s. Yeah, they wanted to win their games, but actually, you know, they're playing against, at that age, players who are 6 to 9 months older than them, sometimes a year older. It's going to be harder, but it's the right thing for them to do, and it's a really good stretch which will stand them in good stead. So I think, I don't know how many coaches you've played under, but if you were just one-dimensional as a player, given the number of coaches you've played under, you would not be around anymore.
Very
so
true.
I think we have to give people skills to play in different ways.
Just want to ask as well, Conor, like in terms of the perfect system, I know we've said, you know, the system has to fit England, but do you look at the Irish system, which a lot is talked about, the Irish system and the way that that's set up? Do you think that they've got the best system in terms of world rugby?
No, I think there's a system people talk about. The system was always there. I mean, I grew up and it was the four provinces, and at that stage there was no exiles. But there's the four provinces, and you had a club system which fed into interprovincial system. So professionalism just allowed that to bed in. I think the challenge is probably in Irish rugby would be the club system underneath is really struggling in terms of numbers. But the professional system is working. So everyone who's growing up in their schools in Dublin, which was always in Cork or Limerick, they're trying to get into Munster, they're trying to get into Leinster, and once they're in it, it's in a really strong place. So they had a fit system. But there was a challenge at one stage when the game did go pro, where the clubs were the ones who wanted to be in Europe and not the provinces, but the Irish Rugby Union said no, it's the provinces, because at that time in 95, 96 the clubs were probably stronger in terms of commerciality, but the system was there. So every system is different, and that's why the challenge in England will always be playing numbers is a great strength. People say look at the playing base, but it's also probably one of the greatest challenges for English rugby, because there's always another option. I'll drop Youngsy and I'll bring in Danny, I'll drop Danny and I'll bring in Joe Simpson, I'll drop Joe Simpson, I'll bring in Alex Mitchell, I'll get rid of him, I'll get in JVP. You need consistency. You can't just keep on chopping and changing. So everyone always wants the next cab off the rank. In Ireland, smaller numbers across the province mean they're very concentrated. Here, there's always someone saying, well, you need to pick him, him and him. If you pick those three, then you're not picking Dan Cole. So who do you want? So I think it's just different. It's different everywhere. And can we learn? Yes. And I think are the enhanced DPS a English solution to that kind of central contract model? Yeah, a little bit. But it's the right thing, because ultimately we get our best core group of England players fitting on the pitch. We're right back up there now in terms of being competitive with anyone. The next challenge for England is competitive and win against the top teams, and the next challenge after that is win regularly against those top teams. You're never guaranteed to win every game, but I think we're in the mix now, playing with a group of players who play a brand of rugby which will excite English rugby fans.
Conor, we saw the other week, or probably about a month ago or so now, New Zealand announced that they're going to sort of play South Africa tour, play the club teams, and play a test series at the end. Do you think that that's something that isolates them away from everyone else in the international game? Or do you think it's feasible to think that England could offer the same to clubs coming over in the autumn, where maybe they play the top deemed from the following year, previous year, the top four teams, whoever made the top four the previous year, play them club games, and then play a 3-test series against England in the autumn?
Aren't there loads of conversations, aren't there, in global calendar? I think, and ultimately as well, we have to look after player welfare and game loads. Now, we'll get into the technicalities over what is the perfect 30 games, and what is right for one player might be different to another. But if you start adding more and more games in, look at what the Premiership is. It's 18 games plus playoffs. Look at Europe, it's 4 plus 4. That's 28 games. You add the internationals in, that's 40. So work it out. If we start adding more and more in, we can't do that. Now, there are natural breaks within those, which don't mean you play 40, which we all understand. But I think we have to be very careful. Whereas if you have a more centrally controlled model, like you're talking about there, you can say, well, actually, look at recently Ireland taking loads of players out and going to South Africa on an emerging tour. Well, we can't do that in the middle of a Premiership. So it's very different, and keep on. Players are going to be playing less. And I hope we become more individualised now we manage players, because 31-minute games is different to 30, 80-minute games. So I think we have to be very careful not to. Science is important. Individual management of players, I think, is more important. What you've done 2-3 years ago in terms of how many games you played, factoring into what you do this year. Do you want to miss game 18 in a Premiership for a semi-final? You might never play it. So like there's this balance between saying it's hard and fast, but we also know if we track and monitor the load of players. So I think going back to your question, Ben, I think it's difficult because we have a big season anyway, and you just add in more games, but never know.
What could you change that would make your job easier?
What energises me? So just coming here and talking rugby, yep. I genuinely love players. I love being in camps. So what would make my job easier? I think if you had Bill Sweeney here, he'd say, just get me out to rugby the whole time. If you could take me away from but you're an age. I remember, I saw you when I went up on kind of the road shows. But I'm one of those. One of the DORs said, "Would you ever get back into like management?" And I said, "I've had my time. I'm too old almost for that." It's almost like this young person's coming to your generation coming through. You look at Douse, George, the group that are around in the Prem at the moment, and some brilliant young English coaches. And it's their time. So what would make my job easier? I don't know if it would make it easier. What would make it energizing is just literally to be involved in camps with players the whole time, because that's what it's about. I love the game, and I get, it's weird. I was excited when I saw your generation growing up. I look at this group, and I know I won't be, as I said, I'll be 70 when AFL's your age, sort of thing. So that's terrible, isn't it? I can't wait to see this group develop, and I hope for English rugby's sake, as we all sit back and look at it, we kind of go, we allowed them fulfill what they are, because I think and you can go up even higher, can't you? I mean, it's Ben Earl at 26 now. So properly married, you look at how that group can all marry together, and it has to excite you as an English rugby fan. It just has to. Our job is to make sure that they're given that chance. And if we don't, I think we've done the whole game a massive disservice.
Maybe the thing that other people don't appreciate is at a human level, everyone is gearing and trying to make the pathway as good as possible. And there's decisions in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's human, isn't it? And if this game that we all love, that's given us so much, if it was an exact science, none of us would have a job. It has to be subjective. There has to be opinion. It's why you go to any bar and they will say, who should be picked at 9? Who should be picked at tight head? Steve Borthwick doesn't have a clue what he's doing. That's the joy of it. And sometimes when you're part of that resilience that you see people develop through their youth is not being picked in teams and kind of go, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. It's been a year young on your pathway, so you're always behind the 8 ball, but you're learning enough on the way up to be able to come through eventually, because it is a maturation sport and people grow, and you kind of when you come back after a summer and the kid that's gone away 5'2" is suddenly 6'10", and you're kind of, well, where did that happen? But then those kids, it's having the ability to, and John Pendlebury's brilliant, who's with the under-18s for the last number of years now, and you remember Fletch in his time, but a big, tall, gangly 17-year-old is going to struggle with their body. They're not going to catch the ball properly. They're going to be uncoordinated. They're going to be getting used to their size. Can you see past that? Because it's so easy to pick the 6'3" bloke who's built, ripped, athletic, but they're not going to be in the second row for England, sort of thing. So and that doesn't mean you're able to make that, spot that. I mean, who spotted that your brother was going to be a hooker?
It was Heineken Mayer, yeah, but no one else did,
But
it's bizarre.
But if he hadn't come across, and Heineken Mayer, if he hadn't had his opportunity at Bedford, if he hadn't someone who didn't mind him missing 15 line-outs in a row, think I remember watching them.
Well,
down
it
in
was,
New-
mate. Yeah, Glenn Delaney. Glenn Delaney at
Yeah,
Nottingham.
he threw
did
one to
that.
the 10,
But
didn't he?
did,
Yeah.
And you're right.
Opposition
You
10,
need people that got the patience.
If he
and-
does look at this, apologies.
No,
but,
no, he'd be happy to admit it.
And I remember watching him play for the 20s or the 21s, whatever it was at the time, down in Newport, and a ball sailing unceremoniously over the top of the back of a line out. But someone had a vision, and he ends up in a British Lion and a Premiership winner and one of the legends of the game. So it's having people around who are willing to see those sort of things and listen. But that's what's brilliant about our game, and it doesn't mean I don't have the answers to everything. You don't. No one does. Everyone thinks they've got this magic that no one does. But if you keep thinking about the players, making it a good environment, but also just think of how lucky we are. The fact that when I left, my mother, God rest her, said to my brother, "Can you convince him there's no future career in rugby? Like when I left Ireland, he shouldn't be doing this." And the game wasn't even pro. We knew it was turning pro. I'd been to the '95 World Cup. I've just been really lucky to be involved in a sport that gives so much, but it's your passion, so it drives emotion of people and it drives opinion, and you just have to say that's part of life. Just get on with it. You've grown up with it. You're not going to agree with everything the whole time, but just be happy that you're in the sport you're in.
And with the RFU, Conor, obviously there's been announced, there's obviously been some redundancy and everything like that. Do you feel like an extra pressure now to make it work?
Not an extra pressure. It's just the same pressure as you always you feel. Said like you feel it's very personal the whole time, even though it's not, but you do. And years ago when I was at Quins, the owner came up to me after we lost the game and said, "Don't take it so personal." And I said, "Well, with respect, if I didn't, you've got the wrong person doing the job, because it has to mean something." And it is tough, in the union when you see this is not. It's not about capability, but I think. And it's not individual at all, but it's making sure through all the good stuff that's there and trot it out, cash, there's cash in the bank, we're debt free as a union, we're in a stable place, but we have to be the right shape, not just as a union, but as a whole game, to make sure that we're around in 10, 15, 20 years time. And it is tough to see people go through a process like that, but hopefully all the stuff that's come post-COVID, almost following back from Italy. I arrived here in January 2020 from Italy, and in March we did the lockdown, and kind of people blame me for bringing them back from Italy. But it is hard, but there's so much work been done to try and make sure that and there's still a lot of work to do, that we recover as a game and we do take our place back we are at the top table. Let's not do ourselves down, but we want to be the very top.
Conor, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, and your passion for the game, it oozes off you, mate. So thank you very much for coming on. Much appreciated.
Brilliant. Thank you.